So, over the past few days, a new set of documents linked to Jeffrey Epstein has been released. Much of the public conversation around them has focused on scandal, celebrity names, and moral outrage. But if we just stop there, we miss the point entirely because what these documents reveal has very little to do with the gossip and scandals and a great deal to do with how imperialist powers function in the modern world.
This isn't about isolated horror or a single depraved individual. It is about how power works. More specifically, it is about how imperialist power functions today, how ruling classes operate, protect themselves, and reproduce their dominance. So, imperialism, it does not rely on armies and bombs, it also relies on networks, financial, political, and personal, that allows Western powers to shape decisions in other countries without appearing to do so directly. So, what appears exceptional in the Epstein case, the sexual violence, the rape, the protection, the silence, it's not separate from the system. It is part of the same capitalist imperialist order that drops bomb on children in Gaza, that starves population through sanctions, and that uses the language of foreign policy and national security to justify mass death. So, today I'll be talking specifically about India. And in countries like India, this role has been played by what we call the comprador class. And if you look closely at India's development trajectory, you will see a clear story. And it shows how a caste privileged comprador ruling class in a country that was once colonized chose to sacrifice the well being of the masses in order to safeguard their own power and their own interest. And one of the defining features of India's comprador class has been the fusion of corporate power with militarized governance. Surveillance technologies, data monopolies, and defense partnerships are increasingly central to this model. So, what we see is that under the guise of national security, technologies are being marketed as tools against terrorism or foreign agents and are deployed even internally against journalists, activists, opposition figures, and even marginalized communities. So, regions like Kashmir or Bastar, they are governed through permanent militarization, mass surveillance, and even legal exceptionalism. One of the most revealing relationship that we saw in the Epstein file is with Anil Ambani, a major Indian billionaire and also close associate of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So emails show that Ambani and Epstein were discussing US ambassadors to India, facilitating meetings between Modi and senior American officials, and also coordinating political engagement at the highest level. So, in other words, a convicted sex offender was functioning as an informal diplomatic intermediary. And this is important because shortly after one of these exchanges, Epstein refers to some sort of Israel strategy connected to Modi's schedule. And soon after that, Modi makes a historic visit to Israel, the first by an Indian prime minister. And most people remember the images: Modi and Netanyahu walking barefoot on a beach, smiling, performing warmth and friendship. But behind these images were very serious deals. India signed defense and intelligence agreements worth around $2 billion, and one of those involved Pegasus spyware. The New York Times described Pegasus and a missile system as the centerpieces of a roughly $2 billion deal finalized during Prime Minister Narendra Modi visit to Israel in July 2017. Now, Pegasus, it's not some sort of neutral technology, it's a surveillance weapon that can read your messages, listen to your calls, and track you without your knowledge. And in India, it has been used not against foreign enemies, but against our own people, against journalists, opposition leaders, activists, and critics of the government. The Modi Netanyahu relationship, it's mostly grounded in arms and intelligence cooperation. India has since become one of Israel's largest arms customer. And according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, India accounted for roughly a third of Israeli arms export between 2020 and 2024, and this relationship has continued despite Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza. India's alignment with Israel and its enthusiastic participation in its military economy, is still being treated positively by the Indian mainstream media. Why? Because domestically, this alignment between India and Israel matters, as it reinforces a political environment in which India's Muslim minority faces increasing persecution, lynching, discriminatory laws, demolitions, openly dehumanizing rhetoric from the state officials. And Kashmir remains under occupation. Surveillance is everywhere, harassment is constant, detention has become routine, and places like Bastar are increasingly governed through similar counterinsurgency logic. Now, Anil Ambani's role has never been just about business. Do you remember the Rafale jet deal of 2016? And at the center of the controversy was not merely the price of the aircraft but the restructuring of the deal itself. So, under the revised agreement, Anil Ambani's defense company, Reliance Defense, was selected as a key partner. And this was remarkable for a simple reason that the company had no good real experience in defense manufacturing. In fact, it had been incorporated only weeks before the deal was announced. Yet this newly formed company was positioned at the heart of a defense purchase worth nearly 8 billion euros. And when questions were raised, the government refused transparency. Parliamentary scrutiny was limited, requests for disclosure were deflected on grounds of national security. And most striking was when the matter reached the Supreme Court of India, the government submitted key reports, key documents in sealed envelopes. This meant that the evidence used to justify one of the largest defense deals in Indian history was withheld from the public. Democratic accountability was replaced with secrecy, and citizens were asked to trust decisions that they were not allowed to examine. We also need to understand India's relationship with Israel and how this relationship isn't just about counter-terrorism or defense, it's also ideological. In Kashmir, India increasingly deploy tactics that are refined by Israel in Palestine. Mass surveillance, collective punishment, demographic control, militarized checkpoints, night raids, enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings. These aren't isolated abuses, they are techniques of occupation. Kashmir and increasingly Bastar functions as a laboratory where Israeli security doctrine is adapted to Indian conditions. And this is why Hindu nationalists have long admired Israel, not despite its settler colonial character, but because of it. Zionism demonstrated that a colonial project could be reframed as national liberation, that mass displacement could be justified as security, and that permanent occupation could be normalized under the language of self defense. And Hindutva has learned those lessons very well. We also need to be honest about the ideological foundations of this violence that we see against the oppressed both in Palestine and in India. Figures like Savarkar openly justified the rape of Muslim women as a tool of domination, and that logic is not unique. We see the same reasoning within Zionist settler ideology, where sexual violence, abuse, and dehumanization are embedded within a broader structure of colonial control. And this is an uncomfortable truth but a necessary one, that the abuse, the rape, and trafficking of women are not accidental byproducts of empire, they are part and parcel of imperial domination itself. Across history, imperial projects have relied not only on military force but on the control of bodies, particularly the bodies of women, as a means of terror, humiliation, and social destruction. Sexual violence becomes a weapon, impunity becomes policy. Understanding this is essential because without recognizing how gendered violence functions within imperial system, we are left treating atrocities just as isolated crimes rather than predictable outcomes of domination.